Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be piercing the side of our pot in this video. So I have a couple different knives to choose from. At school, we have a bunch of different cutting tools, but when you're at home, you're going to have to find something super pointy. So try not to cut yourself, but you'll notice this one is not super sharp, but it is thin, and thin is very good. So if you have anything that you can find that's super pointy and thin, that's going to be perfect. Maybe an old little knife for pumpkin carving might work. Or if you have to, maybe a pointy steak knife. But X-Acto knives work really well. They're just sharp, and so you have to be careful not to cut yourself. Now, you don't want to do this until your pot is hard enough that you can pick it up and push on it, and you're not going to deform it. So you'll notice I can handle mine and it's not collapsing. And at this point, we can smooth out the bottom too, which will make it look a little bit nicer. I like the clay when it's at this point because you can do a lot of things to fix it or change it or alter it. Now you have a couple of choices when you are carving out your piece. First, if you're super creative, you can freehand something, and I would suggest taking a pencil and like drawing out your design, or this is my little kebab stick. So you could draw out what you want your design to look like. But I would do that first because if it's terrible, you can just go like this and it's gone and nobody will know. So that's the nice thing about this point is if you draw it on here and you don't like it, you can just smooth it right out and no one will be able to tell that you were trying something and it didn't work. But I would draw out your design before you begin. If you're not super creative, you could get a stencil. So if you have a stencil laying around, like one of those old pencil stencils that come with little kid pencil kits, or if you go to Michael's, they have a ton of stencils they sell for painting walls, or Walmart will have them really, really cheap. They're for painting walls, and you can use those as a stencil. I also like, as a really awesome technique, if you get old newspaper and you'll notice there's like designs and old photographs and stuff, you can cut it out of there and stick it right on here. And the clay is wet enough, the newspaper will stick right onto the clay, and then you can just cut around the newspaper. So I like that a lot as well. So if you're not very good at drawing on the wet clay, if you draw it out on a piece of newspaper, right, and then cut it out, you can just stick that whole design onto here and then cut around it. The last choice would be to get something like a cookie cutter. So you see like this cookie cutter. They sell these in all different sizes. This is kind of a large one for doing this, but as far as the example, it'll be perfect. So I'm not going to cookie cutter this thing, but I am going to use the cookie cutter to make my marks. And what we want to do is be careful not to cut too much away, because the pot will not be sturdy enough to hold itself up if we cut too much of the pot away. We want a really nice design on the surface, and you would go with your design all the way around before you cut. But in the interest of time and having you guys not stare at me do this, I'm going to just go with those four. If you feel like putting your pot down is going to leave a mark on it, just put a little dry t-shirt underneath it to kind of set your pot on, and then we're going to cut all the way through, being careful that if you have an X-Acto knife, you are not cutting through your finger on the other side. This knife is rather dull, so it's actually very awesome for doing this because I can guide it with my finger on the other side and not cut myself. I'm going nice clean cuts all the way through. Clean cuts all the way through. All right, then using my finger, I'm going to poke out the piece from the other side, and I want to be really gentle to not break this center portion out. Perfect. Okay. Now you'll notice that is not the prettiest. So what I have as a technique is one of these little makeup sponges that we talked about in class, and they're nice because they have very little texture on them. And what you need to do is get it a tiny bit wet and smooth out all of the little edges that you cut, because they're not going to look very nice. We want nice smooth edges. You can also, if the makeup sponge doesn't work for you, you can use the paintbrush technique. Do you remember, don't get too wet. Paint, 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 paint. Actually, I think that's easier than the makeup sponge, so I think I'm just gonna use the paintbrush. I'm kind of a paintbrush person anyways. Okay, we want the front to be super nice, super pretty. Nice smooth edges. That's where your grade comes from, is having nice smooth edges. Now, I said this hole is a little bit big, and I want you to notice why. When I put the candle on the inside, you're gonna be able to see the candle. Now that seems like it might be a good idea, but actually it takes away from the effect of the luminary because you don't really wanna see where the light is coming from. You want it to be a mystery, very fancy. But we also want the inside to be smooth. So I'm just smoothing it with my finger. And smoothing your design will be much easier once it is a little bit more set up, more dry, because although it's holding its shape, it's kind of sticking to my finger, which is leaving little drag marks on the clay. So that's what it looks like right now. So again, let's remember what your tips are. One, you can get a little cookie cutter like I have and just use it to create the design, go all the way around. You could freehand a design with a kebab stick. So if you're really artistic, you freehand. If you're not feeling so artistic, you can cut something out of paper. So an old kid's coloring book or newspaper where you drew something on that, and then just stick it straight to the clay because the clay should be moist enough that it'll stick right to it. And you just cut around it. And you're just being careful that when you come up with your design, you want your cuts to be a pattern of some sort. You want an equal amount of negative and positive. So you want, this is our positive and this is our negative, and you want an equal amount so that we're able to see the light come out of it, but we don't want too much light and we don't want too much dark. We want about 50-50% of each of those two. When you're cutting, see this little tiny section right here? That's a little bit close. So be careful when you're cutting that, you know, if you cut too much and the whole thing falls over, you will have to start again. So you want to leave plenty of room in between your cuts so that your piece is stable and isn't going to fall apart on you. Thank you. Get to work. Good luck.